All right, in this next video, we are going to continue on with the series that we did on the last 3 videos for my lesson 8 with the flat list. And basically what we're going to do here is we are going to take our basic flat list, which we saw here in this design, and we're going to take all of the code that is inside one row and the different functionality that makes it so that it changes color when we're selected on and so that it knows what's being selected. And we're going to take all that functionality and we are going to put it into its own component. So in order to do that, we're going to start out by making a new file in our components folder called listrow.tsx, and we're going to use that shortcut snip rnfes to get the starter code. So let's go ahead and let's do that. And I'm just going to follow along with these steps. So if you want to open this up off to the side, you can, but I'm just going to go ahead and code along with you as we do it. So for starters, I don't like this color here. I'm just going to change this back to what it was before, just because that blue looks pretty ugly. And then, so now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to follow along with those directions. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to make a new file in our components folder, and we want to call this file listrow.tsx. And then after we do that, we are going to go ahead and do the rnfes snippet. And again, if you're not seeing that snippet show up, look at your extensions. You want to make sure you have this extension right here, this ES7 by DSZ imported. And that's what gives you this extension, right, or this code snippet right here. Okay, so what we're going to do is we are going to, within here, in our flat list basics, we are going to add a new function, and we're going to adjust this function so that way it is something that can be called when I click on a row element. So right now I have a function to change what's being selected. I'm going to make a function that's called handle row press, and essentially this function is going to receive an item of type data type, okay, and what it's going to return is it is going to, we're going to log the item's title, so we can go ahead and take this here. And we're also going to call set selected item ID. So what this is going to do is this is going to set the ID of the item that is selected, and it's going to log it. And I'm going to call this function whenever I press on a different item. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to import my list row. So if I go up to the top, I'm going to say import list row. And we can save this. And then we are essentially going to go down here and look at all of our code that is being used to render one of these elements. And the way that you can tell which code is being used to render the item is if you look at the render item prep. And if I were to minimize this, this tells me where render item starts and stops. So I can see this opening parenthesis, this closing parenthesis. I can see this open curly brace, this closing curly brace. This right here is essentially saying everything inside from here to here is what is being done for my render item. So I find that helpful when I'm trying to see where the code starts and stops. Sometimes it can get a little confusing. All right, so we want to take all of this code that is inside render item, and we want to take it starting at the touchable opacity and going until the end of the touchable opacity. So essentially, I want all of this code. So for me, that's lines 50 through 76. And I'm going to take this code and I'm going to end up deleting it and moving it. But for right now, I'm just going to copy it. And I'm going to come over here to my list row. And that is what I want to see right here inside my return for my list row. Now you'll notice that there are a bunch of things here that are yelling at me. For starters, it doesn't know what these styles are. It doesn't know what colors is. There are a whole bunch of things that are missing here. So now we're going to have to update some of those things. So we're going to have to go ahead and import our colors. And we are going to need to grab these styles for row text and row container. So I can come back over here. And I'm going to take these, and I would recommend as you're starting out and getting used to this whole idea of moving code around, that as you're moving it, you keep the other code where it was until you're sure you've got it where you want it to be. Okay, so now that I've got that done, I can go ahead and I can finish tidying this up. I'm going to need to add this touchable opacity to my imports. because that wasn't there before. And almost everything has been taken care of. The one thing that is still yelling at me is it doesn't know what selected item or selected list is. It doesn't know what item is, and it doesn't know what selected ID is. All right, now in order to make my list row work correctly, I have to give it the ability to receive props. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a data type for my props, and I'm going to say type list row props equals, and then open a curly brace, and then with inside here I'm going to have an item, which will be an ID that is of type string and a title that is of type string. Man, I keep on doing that. And then after my item, I am also going to have an is selected Boolean. And then lastly, I want to have an onPress. And what this is doing is this is allowing me to send an entire function to my list row as a prop. And the syntax that I'm going to do is I'm going to say, all right, I'm going to have my input parameter, and this input parameter is returning a void, okay? And for my input parameter, I'm going to call it item, and item is going to be an object that has an ID with a string and a title that has a string. So essentially what I'm doing here is I am saying that my onPress is going to receive an item, which is like this, and when it receives the item, it's just going to do something and it's not going to return anything. All right, so now that I have my data type set up, I need to add that data type to my functional component header. So I'm going to say it's going to be a react.fc, and I'm going to give it a type, and I'm going to say list row props. And then just like we did in a previous video, I'm going to destructure this prop so that way when I refer to its values inside the code, I can just say item and is selected and so on, and I don't have to go further into that. All right, so now what I'm saying here is that I'm receiving an item. An item is going to be an object with an ID and a title. I'm receiving a Boolean is selected, and I'm receiving an onPress function that will have this item as a parameter. All right, so now I just have to update how these values are being referred to in my code. So before, my onPress was calling selected list. Well, this code doesn't know what selected list is. And really and truly, the function could be called whatever. All my component knows of it as is onPress. So whatever function was passed in here, that function will be called, and the item that is being rendered within this component will be passed to that function. Next, I want to look at this right here. And in this case, instead of saying if item ID is equal to selected, because selected is just a Boolean, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have my background color just be equal to this Boolean is selected. And when we actually call this list row, when we pass it in render item, we will do that check at that point and pass in either true or false. And then we're going to have to update the same thing right here and make this equal to is selected here in my text. And then let's see, and then everything else should be good to go. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. And now the last thing that we need to do is we need to actually call this within my index. So let's go over to, my FlatList basic. So let's go back over to FlatList basic, and now we are going to call this this item. And so let's take a look at how that will be done. All right, so this is where all the fun gets to happen. So now we're going to take all of this code that is inside my render item. So that starts with my touchable opacity and finishes with my touchable opacity, and we're going to delete all of it because we've now moved all of that code into my list row component. And I'm going to say that I'm going to put a list row here, and I want to make sure that this list row is imported, and it looks like it is imported. Okay, so that's good. And now I need to add my props to it. And so if you remember, for the props that we had our item object, a Boolean if we were selected, and the onPress function. So if I come back over here, my item is going to be equal to the item that I'm currently rendering. Okay, so this item right here. My is selected is going to be equal to, and then inside curly braces, because I want to evaluate this JavaScript, I'm going to check if the item's ID is equal to the selected ID. So if the current item that I'm rendering has an ID equal to the selected ID, then I will pass in true. Otherwise, I will pass in false. And then for my onPress, I am going to handle, or I'm going to send in this function that we just made, this handle row press. All right, so if we go ahead and we save this, we are going to notice now that my functionality looks the same. Now, if you're not sure if it really and truly did what we said, let's go over here and let's make some changes. If I make this font size bigger and save this, I can now see, hey, that did in fact make a change there. If I make this row height bigger, I can see that that did change that as well. So all of this code within list row is controlling how this row of data will look. And so let's say my app had several flat lists within it. I could design the look once and then implement it many times over. And so the last thing that you want to do, once we've gotten this code how we like it, since I am no longer using row container or row text, these can get deleted. And really and truly, I could actually get rid of my style sheet, but I'm just going to keep it there in case I decide to want it later. And then we can go ahead and we can clean up some of this other stuff that we're no longer using. You can get rid of any imports you're not using, because it's a good idea to keep your code as clean as possible. All right, so we have basically seen how we can design a flat list, how we can make it change the way that it looks based on what's selected. We've seen how we can design a custom item separator. And then in this last video, we just learned how we can take all of that code that designed one row and we can put that inside of our own custom component. Thank you for watching.